Hello and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Fry. On this episode, we have two interviews, the first of which is Brad Burnett, the Executive Vice President of ITC Construction Group. Burnett was on a panel at the recent Independent Contractors and Businesses Association of BC Innovation Summit titled The Future of Construction is Pre-Construction, and he explained how he went from an estimator with ITC to a one-man department and how over the ensuing years pre-construction has grown in importance and points the way forward for the industry. We also have another interview with Amy Marks, the Executive Vice President of technology firm Symmetry USA, and also known on social media as the Queen of Prefab. Marks delivered a keynote called The Evolution of Industrialized Construction, and she pointed not only to the opportunities as construction becomes more modular, standardized, and digitized, but also the challenges on the way, since large tech players such as Amazon and Google may involve themselves in both the data and supply side of the business. But before the interviews, here's the latest stories from the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce. From the east, the Western Clean Energy Sorting and Recycling Facility, a new 42,000 square foot facility in Kincardine, Ontario, was opened by Laurentis Energy Partners in partnership with EnergySolutions Canada and is aiming to minimize waste associated with nuclear energy generation. The facility was developed by LEP and constructed by Damcor Construction Limited. Built for Ontario power generation, the facility focuses on sorting materials like protective clothing or small tools from OPG's nuclear generating stations. John Bleasby's latest legal notes column says objective analysis determines contract repudiation. He goes into detail on a case where the Ontario Superior Court of Justice was considering a dispute between a townhouse developer, Islington Chauncey Residences Corp., and their contracted construction manager, Sundance Development Corporation. Islington claims Sundance had breached the contract when they walked off the project, while the manager countered the developer had repudiated the contract. To find out more, check out the article in the Daily Commercial News. In U.S. news, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, recently announced its most frequently cited workplace safety standards for 2023, and fall protection general requirements remains at the top of the list, followed by hazard communication and ladders. From the west, Calgary's industrial real estate sector is gaining traction as a distribution hub, with distribution space asking rates considerably lower than those of Vancouver and Toronto. The past year has seen Calgary's industrial market maintain a robust health, notably in Q3 2023. Recent findings from the fall 2023 Energy Sector Survey highlight a prevailing sense of optimism within the Canadian energy industry. The survey, conducted by ATB Capital Markets Inc. between September 18th and October 2nd, garnered insights from executives spanning a broad spectrum of the energy domain, 30 energy services companies, 26 exploration and production firms, and 29 institutional investors. According to the report, 88% of E&P executives demonstrated a positive outlook for the sector, with anticipations of growth in the forthcoming year. This perspective was echoed by 60% of energy service executives who foresee heightened activity levels over the upcoming 6 months. That's it for the headlines, but up next, here's our interview with Brad Burnett, followed by Amy Marks. Enjoy. I'm here with
Brad Burnett, Executive Vice President of the ITC Construction Group.
We just came out of a session at the ICBA's Innovation Summit all about pre-construction. You are, I would say, a pioneer probably, especially in Vancouver specifically, because you were the pre-construction department at ITC, and you were an estimator before that. So you kind of have a unique and experienced perspective as opposed to a few other people on the panel. So maybe you could go into what made you decide to start the pre-construction department in the first place.
Sure. So what we found was, we had an estimating department that would run estimates on projects, and then we would have the project execution teams, the project managers, the superintendents that would actually build the projects. But the handoff from estimating to project delivery wasn't very smooth, and there were a lot of sort of gaps and holes that weren't really being filled through that process. And so as an estimator, I sort of saw the inefficiency in that and really sort of asked myself the question, how can we do this better? And that's really where we decided to sort of focus on a continuous pre-construction department. And I sort of put my hand up and proclaimed myself the one-man pre-construction department, set up a desk in a hallway and called it my office. And,
it worked great.
It actually worked out really well because there were constantly people walking through all day. So I'd be able to grab a project manager, grab a superintendent, grab a safety person, and actually ask them questions. And somebody came up to me and said to me, when we started, hey, I don't think you really realize what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. And I said, that's exactly the point. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I'm going to rely on everyone else to sort of help me actually learn all of this and create a really efficient and hopefully all-encompassing process.
Now, one of the things that was mentioned is that construction has always been, and it's getting better, but traditionally it's draw your sword in battle? And not to get into internal ITC matters, but just generally speaking, did you find at the beginning that was something you kind of had to deal with maybe outside of the company as well?
Well, starting out 25 years ago, estimating, it was very much a design, bid, build model. And that just inherently is a somewhat adversarial model where everybody's sort of entrenched with their own interests and really sort of waiting for the other side to sort of reveal their cards before they do anything. Where, getting involved in the pre-construction process early, hopefully everybody can sort of put on the table what's important to them and everybody sort of has an aligned interest. And as opposed to everyone sort of holding their cards close to their chest, we can actually put them all out on the table and say, okay, where are the risks? Where are we going to get into trouble? How can we keep ourselves all sort of on the same side of it and communicate a lot more openly than in the traditional design bid build body?
And you said ITC, I think is predominantly a pre-con. And so where did you find that you gained that trust eventually? Like, what was the process you went through? Because it is all about the trust between everybody at the table, right? So,
well, the biggest sort of, I think, challenge we had initially was actually having our clients and our trade partners trust the process and know that by making commitments early, you weren't necessarily missing out on like a competitive process or that you were getting really good value. And so I think as we sort of went through that process on a couple of projects, people really started appreciating the end result and understanding the value of doing it. And they went from being somewhat skeptical of making commitments early to actually really appreciating that making those commitments early sort of works for everybody. And so I think there was a bit of a light bulb moment with some of our clients and trade contractors where suddenly it sort of showed that the process was actually going to work. It was going to work really well. And since then, in the last 20 years, pretty much all the projects we've done have followed that very model.
One of the things you mentioned is, the stumbling blocks can be timing. So maybe you could talk about, you talked about the magic moment to talk to clients about things. Too early can be a problem, too late is definitely a problem.
Yeah, so too early, a lot of times what happens is if a client needs cost certainty, schedule certainty, design certainty early, before everyone's had a chance to really do their job properly, people start getting overly conservative and they start sort of either making allowances or contingencies or doing things that aren't necessarily the most efficient just so that they can be comfortable that they're going to be able to achieve it later. If you do it too late, a lot of times what happens is you're too far in on the design process and or the procurement process to actually be able to realize a lot of the inherent savings that would come with a really good decision early on.
And kind of along with that, one of the other people on the panel mentioned there are some things you just can't control, like big macroeconomic things like, say, a pandemic or supply chains or interest rates, any of these things. There's nothing you can do about those. But in some ways, this addresses that, although you do have to talk about the client and say, hey, this might cost you a little more now, but not later.
Yeah, we certainly saw that in the last couple of years, is trying to be really upfront with our clients on where we potentially saw some of the risks and understanding what the impact of the job would be, and then looking at ways that we could try to either mitigate it or give them some choice into potentially going different directions on certain things. And so anywhere from the availability of materials, shipping delays, price escalation, there's a lot of things that we propose to our clients that they were agreeable to that aren't necessarily covered, say, under a contract, but they understood that it was good for the project, that there was a benefit to doing it. And so a lot of our clients actually did things that we wouldn't normally maybe expect them to do, but everybody sort of understood it was extraordinary times and required extraordinary measures.
And Jeff Sample, who was sort of the moderator, he said, it's probably an obvious statement to anybody in the room, but construction isn't easy. So maybe you could sort of elucidate, if some smaller company, let's say, wants to get into pre-construction, what are some of the things they should be looking out for that don't make them go, oh, wait, what are we doing?
Well, certainly one of the things that we realize is the amount of resources of time that it takes to actually do pre-construction well is a lot more than what we initially anticipated. And then understanding that nobody's an expert on everything. So when to call in an external expert, how to build a relationship with people both internally and externally to know where to use their expertise in a certain subject matter. And then also just the ability to communicate really well with everybody involved so that when there are issues later on, it's not a discussion on, well, who made that decision? It's a discussion on, we all made this decision together. And so now we have to understand what we need to do to actually fix this.
And I guess finally I'd ask, another thing Jeff Sample said was this industry 5 years from now is going to be nothing like it is now, which is nothing like it was 5 years ago. So where do you see the future of pre-con going?
Well, I certainly see a bigger emphasis on pre-construction going forward. Typically, even say 10 years ago, if you were to look at an RFP for a project, it would focus a lot on the site team and who was actually going to be building the project. Now we've seen a shift to more emphasis on the pre-construction team and what we're going to do sort of upfront to actually add value to the project prior to construction starting. I think there's going to be a lot more emphasis on pre-construction going forward in the selection of general contractors, construction managers, trade contractors, etc. I also see technology playing a role in it. There's a lot of different platforms out there that can help with decision making and 3D modeling and a lot of other things that I think are going to probably make the process a little bit more efficient. But ultimately, I think it's the level of trust that people are going to start putting in a good pre-construction process that's really going to change the way we actually procure projects.
Okay, and I said finally, but I'm going to sneak one more in. Procurement was mentioned, specifically public procurement, because that seems like the biggest stumbling block just in terms of process they have to go through. So, other than lobbying the government, what can you do to help fix that problem?
Well, certainly I think the more we get industry engaged, and, I think one of the great things about a panel like we just saw is having industry peers up on stage and understanding that we all have a lot of the same challenges and the same concerns. And, we use the term fear. We all have a lot of the same fears, and understanding what those fears are on our side, and then understanding what the fears are on the public side as well. And how can we actually address those and try to either mitigate, manage, and or sort of change the perception on those fears is going to be really important. I think that, the concept that if you don't go out to a large sort of public process, you're not getting good value is something that pre-construction has shown to actually not be the case. But it's, I think, going to take a little bit of time for people to see the benefits of that on multiple projects to really understand it and actually have a part of the normal process.
Okay, Brad, thanks for joining us today. I'm here with
Amy Marks, Executive Vice President of Global Strategy at Symmetry.
And you were talking about, prefab is actually sort of minimizing it, actually. So industrial construction. Industrialized construction. And one of the things that struck me the most is when you said, this isn't just sexy boxes on top of sexy boxes in the New York Times. Which
right.
I've been to a number of these things, and that is generally what you hear about because it looks cool.
Right.
But you kind of pushed back on that. So maybe you could explain what you meant by that and what the real world, and obviously stuff is in the New York Times in the real world, but the stuff everybody's actually going to be working on.
Yeah, it's not that it doesn't happen. I used to build modular high-rise and things like that, and I was on the cover of the New York Times, actually. So, but most of that's such a tiny, tiny percentage of what's happening. Mm-hmm. Most of the industrialized construction is happening in the trade contractor world. And so MEP contractors and mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and structural contractors, anything that's like behind the walls, above the ceilings, or underground, all the complicated bits, the plant rooms, that's what's being fabricated all the time. And we never see that on the front page of anything, but all these guys have been fabricating for decades now, and they don't get really a lot of credit for how their means and methods have actually advanced.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing you pointed out was that for all this talk of the future, none of this stuff talks to each other, or at least they don't. They do a lot less than they used, or a lot less than they should be. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
It's true. It's funny. I was meeting with a company recently because I do strategy for companies as well as our company. And I said, what keeps you up at night? To this this chief information officer. Mm-hmm. And he said, all the software that I have and what revisions they are and whether or not they'll talk to one another. And I said, a platform like my phone updates it all the time. I never even noticed unless like for a split second, I can't use one of my apps. And I was thinking, I said to him, like, if you think about it, maybe you should spend your time thinking about something else because technology is going to fix that eventually. Maybe not tomorrow, and you kind of have to worry about it for now. But if you think about a real platform adjusts and updates, and the apps adjust and update as you need them. Mm-hmm. So again, it's not my opinion. That's evidence-based. Even my iPhone does that all the time.
And how close are we to that in construction? Because it sounds like not very, but you also said there's sort of these frou-frou ideas about an army of robot dogs are going to build your building, which eventually will happen.
I think he does too.
But not yet.
No, not yet. I think robot dogs are cool. I think there's things that are cool out there like exoskeletons. And look, I'm like the biggest Hilti super fan on like all that small robotic stuff. But the issue is that, we haven't normalized this into our daily lives. And I think COVID happening helped us understand we need to be more digital in the world, and digital natives need to exist in our space. And, look, we're talking about that you need people in this space, and 3% of women are in the trades. Like, there's a whole 47% of us out there that you can come and talk to that are probably digital native, right, already. I think we're not that close, but I think there's a vision for it, and I think we can see it. I think it's like if I made an analogy to my phone, it would be like, remember when you used to like use your iPhone, but you had to use your computer for like long distance VoIP, and then like a website would come up and I'd have to write the phone number down and then I'd have to call it. We're there.
Yeah.
I would say like we're in that part of the platform story, mostly.
The early 90s.
The early 90s. If you think about where we're at, we're in the early 90s. I mean, again, not that people haven't done amazing things, they are, but I don't think everyone can take advantage of it. It hasn't been democratized so that we can all make sure our apps are updating and, everything happens.
Just to divert for a second, you said you had a diversity minute and was more than a minute. That's fine.
Right.
But anyway, maybe you could talk about that, because you were talking about how many welders there are that are women that you know personally, and that there's this image that that's not the case.
I think it's insane. I think it's like, honestly, like I was at a conference recently and they had a bunch of men standing around talking about how they can get women into the space. And I was like, you have a women's group, just ask us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel like everyone's immediate reaction is we've got to go to the middle schools.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm sitting in this industry right now. I have plenty of friends that I would tell to work in this space or not work in this space based on how I feel if I belong in this space. I think, look, we are still calling the unions in the United States the brotherhood. And like, if you're a 14-year-old girl in high school, even if you go to the middle schools, you don't even know that you can go up and talk to those guys, right? Like, I mean, the story I told today is really sad about people not hiring women welders and things like that. And look, on parity for men with money, construction is the best thing you can do. You make actually like 95, 96% of what a man makes when it's 76% for any other job. Like, we actually make great money, and maybe you can get more than that on the leadership side. You can pass 100% in parity. So I think, again, we have to look in the right places for them. That's why I'm so passionate about the Women's Rugby Foundation, because they're there. I see them there all the time. I'm like standing in front of women that could work on a construction site and young girls that are welding, and they have no sponsors, no one's there with a sign, and they all tell me they want to reach women. Well, there's a plenty of opportunities. You got to do it, right?
I know one of the interviews I did was this two women from Boston who tried to go to minority neighborhoods and get women to work in construction. And they made the very good point that has stuck with me for years now, that if you're a nurse and you can carry a body to a bed, you can certainly do anything in construction.
Yeah, I'm going to tell this story. At that same conference, one of the gentlemen was saying, well, we can't get minorities, especially women that don't want to work with us. And I swear to you, I walked outside and I talked to one woman from housekeeping and one woman from catering, and they spoke Spanish. I had my book in Spanish, more English, and I was like, look, if you worked in construction, you'd have to lift very heavy things, you'd have to be dirty. She's like, I clean toilets for a living, and I'm pulling a catering guy.
I already do that.
She's like, I can already do that. She's like, I would be happy to make 3 times what I make if somebody would just give me the training that I need in order to get there. So I think it's a bit of a cop-out. You know what I mean? I think that, look, if you truly want something to happen, you always make it happen. So my answer is that, look, do you have PPE for women and pregnant women? Are you getting different, gender neutral bathrooms, or bathrooms like on the job site for women alone? Like, I think if you truly want something to happen, the thing is it costs money to do those different things, and you need to make an effort. And I think also from an HR perspective, we're not used to some of the more political issues that happen when you are interviewing. It's like if when the Navy decided to have a couple women in submarine, it's like, okay, it didn't go perfectly, and they had to decide, okay, some of the same policies and practices we did, we can't do anymore.
Right.
You can't just walk around naked if you have women in a submarine.
Right.
Well, there's a whole other situation going on here. We have to make changes to our culture. And I think that's just hard,
And you pointed out, just generally there's resistance, and it's from the inside before it's from the outside.
Always. I mean, it is always from the inside. People that are, if you read that book that I recommended today, It Starts With One, it talks about the fact that sometimes people don't see themselves in the future state.
Yeah.
But the other more common thing is that when they do something successful, and they've done it for so many years, they're like, look, it becomes sort of like, we did the right thing and it had the right results, but now we're doing the wrong thing and we're still getting good results, but they're really small. We're getting commoditized. And so they go, what should we do? And they go, let's just do it that much harder. And they squeak out a little bit more percentage points in an ROI. They go, see, I told you, the same old way worse. But they don't realize that just is a losing game. Mm-hmm. So they have to do the new right thing, but they don't do that really well at first. So they have to get in that cycle of understanding how to do that new right thing well again. So I think that's hard, and I think we're in such a project-centric world. People don't see their skills there. They don't know what their future holds if they don't know, if they're not digitally native, it's scary for them.
And another point you made was you were talking to somebody, a 70-year-old executive, And he was saying, I'm never putting my stuff on Amazon because they
Right.
can't sell properly. And you made the very good point. I buy stuff for my kid on Amazon. If I trust my kid, then your pipes are not that big a deal. But anyway, you also said that Amazon, Google, whoever else, Alibaba,
Right.
these guys, I'm shocked it hasn't happened already, are coming for this at some
Yeah,
point.
I
How do you
think
do that?
so.
So what do these people do then?
I mean, you can either be a part of it, and I think you can be the ones that are, look, lots of people don't have brick and mortar shops anymore, and they sell a lot of things on Amazon these days, right? They would never go back to their brick and mortar shop because they work from their house, they have a facility. I think we have to realize that there are people that are willing to do a different business and get paid on value in a different way than you are today. And they're out there. I mean, look, that conference, Advanced Prefab, has over 1,200 contractors and owners and architects there. They all know they are doing business differently, right? And again, that would be like no one ever sold another thing after Amazon decided to have an online store.
Right.
That's not true. There are plenty of people that flourish, right? But it did, Jeff Bezos said, that margin on margin on margin is my opportunity. What other ecosystem do you know in this space that has margin on margin on margin on, I mean, like infinite margin on margin?
It says $14 trillion.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just sitting there not connected.
right. And like, but the money that's made here is mostly made on waste and inaccurate, the sort of on the lack of information or information that's wrong. And that's, we've been sort of a cash for chaos, ecosystem.
That's another point you made about how there's an opportunity here to reduce waste.
That's right.
Through industrialized construction. So
Right.
you could speak to that as well.
So I think because we're not connected, there's a lot of assumption-based design that happens. And so they just assume, like, squint your eyes, it kind of looks like this to do that electrical room. That's not true. They just don't have a place to click and search and sort and look for an electrical room to put into the drawings in real time with real understanding of what it would cost and if it's available and what the embodied carbon for that piece part is, right? They're not able to do that. So they're doing this assumption-based design that then gets iterative processed over and over and over again. And by the time it gets to the person that makes it, is not the most efficient way to make that. So they have to cut pieces and they have to weld different things. And that's why I think 1/6 of what's in our landfills is drywall. Because they have to cover all these things, but they're such misshapen, they have to like cut different ways. So it's not that it's not possible. It's just people are getting paid to do assumption-based design. And we are getting paid to then go out and estimate it. And then we are getting paid to go out and bid those assumptions. And then we're getting paid to draw the actual drawings that need to get made, or maybe not, depending on who's drawing them. But it's just wasteful. We have a wasteful process that could be flipped on its head, and I think is being flipped on its head. The mini marketplaces are a big actual indicator for me. Like mini marketplaces existing, that's like somebody having an online web store and then Amazon going like, hold on a minute, we can eat that up, right? And I think that's what happened, although they started as a bookseller. But I think right now, before companies go digital on their big sales stuff, they see like their competitors are doing it, other people are doing it, and we're sort of in that space right now.
Okay, so you've raised a lot of questions that I'm sure people listening would want to have answered, and you say you will answer to people. So how do they get a hold of you?
You can look for me on any social media as the Queen of Prefab. You can Google me. I have a website, queenofprefab.com. You can reach out to Symmetry and ask for Amy Marks, the EVP of Global Strategy. But I do try to answer everything that comes through on social media because I'm passionate about this and I know we need change.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of the Construction Record Podcast. You can hear us on Amazon Music, Apple Music, and Spotify, as well as on the Daily Commercial News and Journal Commerce websites. Thanks for listening.